Hi, this is Siofra Bradigan, and this is Siofra's Magic Alcove. So, after having a conversation with one of my friends like 10 days or so ago, I decided it might be worthwhile to talk about what happens when you pass over to the other side from what I know, what I've seen, and what I've experienced, and why it's important for us to um, do as much clearing and processing here while we're alive before we get to that point. So, first off, of course, everyone is going to die at some point. That's one of the realities of being in a physical form that we need to accept. Not that we need to work towards becoming that or anything, but sometimes just the process of facing your own mortality is an important piece of the puzzle. So, it kind of releases a huge amount of barriers from people when they can accept the fact that that is the way it is. So, we've done videos about thought forms and larvae and so forth, which is actually an important part of this. So, if you don't have a clear understanding of what larvae and thought forms are, you might want to watch the video on that after you watch this so that you have a more complete picture. But in essence, when you cross the veil between this life and the in between state, your thoughts are now visible. So everything you've ever been afraid of, everything you've ever hoped for, everything um, you've judged yourself for becomes immediately visible to view. Every action that you've taken in a life, every thought you've had about action you haven't taken in a life, all of that becomes like materialized in not in a material physical sense, but in a spiritual reality where you are crossing through. So the first thing that happens is the review of the life that you just had. And that's part of that process, seeing um, particular things that you're ashamed of, or feel responsible for, are good deeds. I mean, it's everything. It's not just like one little thing here and there. It's like the entire life itself. And I believe that that's undoubtedly true because when I was energetically joined with the cow and they shot the cow, and I was pulled out to the other side when the cow's spirit rose up from its body, even the cow saw its entire life flash before its eyes. It's sort of a weird thing. But if it can happen even to a cow, I'm pretty confident that that is definitely something that happens to us. And right now, we're not talking about people who might get stuck in the process. We're going to talk about just the process. So you get pulled into this alternate reality and are faced with uh, all of this life that you've just had. So, what I remember from one of my past lives, I remember this process from one of my past lives, which is how I got this information, I guess. And in that life, I had not been a great person. I hadn't really been an evil person, but I was raised in the church and I had wanted to kill my husband, even though I failed to kill him. I had wanted to kill myself, and even though I failed to kill myself, um, and wanted to haunt my children, even though I failed to haunt my children, those thoughts and ideas and notions were there and visible. And being limited at that point or in that life with to my understanding of what was happening. Thought forms are very harsh in the negative ones. They're just harsh. I mean, they're not beautiful. They don't have nice colors. They don't have nice sounds. If they're ugly thoughts, if they're good thoughts, then it changes. And good thoughts and memories are going to have wonderful um, colors and smells, and the visual experience of them is going to be comforting, not terrifying, and so forth. And part of the other reason I thought it'd be a good idea to do this was someone was wondering about people that he knows that are in his church who have started to cross over and seen like horrific visions of fire and in evil and so forth, and why does that happen? And of course, it all depends on what we bring with us. It's entirely us. We bring this to the other side with us. So in that particular experience that I had in that past life, was raised in the church. It was medieval times. There really weren't many options. I was in Europe somewhere, and seeing the negative thought forms that I generated by these instances, the wanting to kill the husband, wanting to kill myself, etc. Um, I decided that it was pretty obvious, looking at all that, that I deserved to go to hell. And so I judged myself as being unworthy of anywhere else, even though I hadn't done any of those things. It's just sort of ironic. I only had a couple of positive thoughts that I could stand to look at, like the relationship I had with my dog was one of them, and the other one was a rather superficial book I tried to write, which was sort of a fairy tale kind of book. And so I did. I sent myself to hell in that life. And the thing that I learned about being in hell is that you can only stay there as long as you can remember why you deserve to be there. So it's not like an eternity. There's no way you could maintain that level of focus, understanding, and attention for an eternity. It's not a doable thing. So at some point, I couldn't remember why I was there anymore. And then I was somewhere else. The somewhere else, I think, was like in between deciding when, who, how to come back and what to do and that kind of thing. So that experience is the reason why I think it's very important for us to clear out ourselves, to do the shadow work. The shadow work not being done is what leads to what I did to myself. And of course, at the time, there wasn't a potential for that because I didn't even know what that was in that particular existence. So that's one piece. And that actually was true for being an earthbound spirit, because I was an earthbound spirit in that life as well. So another part of that after death process, the reason I became earthbound was because I was by myself when I had, I'm assuming, a heart attack, because I was suddenly standing in a different part of the room and my body was on the floor. It was very sudden. But I had an attachment to my dog who was there with my body, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen to my body, and I was worried that someone wasn't going to find me. And I've actually met a few spirits who've gotten stuck for exactly that reason in recent times, where they passed by themselves and they weren't found for several days. And then they ended up getting stuck there. Because my understanding of that is that the process of dying itself opens up that portal. It's sort of a natural process that happens. But there's ways for you to interfere with it. And pulling yourself back down here because you're worried about what's going to happen to your remains and how your loved ones will feel and all this other stuff is one of the ways. The other way, of course, is it happens so suddenly that you don't even notice that it has happened and you still think you're alive and going about your business, which I've seen too. Um, so it farther along in that process, after I sent myself to hell and then I wasn't there anymore and I was somewhere else, it's like that whole notion of moving on when you can't maintain a cohesive thought about where you should be. So that's the limiting factor. Although remembering that was highly unpleasant, I can tell you. I talk about that somewhat in my video, Shamanic Dismemberment, because that's kind of where a lot of that firsthand experience comes from, and seeing things, parts of myself that I had denied or rejected and not processed and incorporated, then became this larger than life kind of thing in between lives that I had to deal with in order to take control of the one that I'm currently in. And so it was like I rejected these pieces of myself, and they went on to have not fun experiences because I sent them to hell or wherever. And I had to remember them enough and accept them and take them back in order to process that so that they wouldn't be hopefully left behind again. So when I'm helping a spirit to cross over and opening up that portal to the other side, basically what I'm doing is reopening that moment that someone should have had at death when their loved ones come to try and help them process this suddenly different state of existence. And I know that each one of them is different. There's no two that are alike. They're vastly different. I see them when I open up the portal and work with the spirit. I see the reality that they're going to. I see the differences between those realities and all the other ones that I've seen, and I've never seen the same place twice. If I was doing same family members, maybe, but that hasn't happened. So I've never actually seen the same place twice, which leads me to the conclusion that we're creating it out of our own thoughts and our desires, our needs. And then the reason why some people come back pretty quickly is because they have something that is left unfinished that they feel is their responsibility to do, or something they really want to do, and they're like drawn back into a body to try and finish that thing. It's not as straightforward in the way of thinking that you pick and choose your parents and your circumstances. It's more of a instinctive pull back here for whatever reason, which is another important reason why we need to process uh, all of our things as much as we can, so we have a chance to maybe make more conscious choices after we pass. And because in actuality there isn't any real hell, unlike there's plenty of people who believe in it. There certainly are people who've been there and come back, and it seems real, but it isn't real in the sense that it would exist if we didn't create it in our minds, because we're sort of the architects of the other side when it comes to where we're going to end up. We are our own architect, and we make it happen. Just because lots of other people think the same thing and make the same thing happen doesn't mean it has reality in the larger sense of the universe. It just means that it's a pretty common process, and currently not a very uncommon thought and idea that we need to be punished for something we haven't done correctly in a life, instead of recognizing that we make mistakes, and if we learn from those mistakes and move on, then it should be okay. um, and that's the thing, is like this comes directly from our unconscious and our subconscious. So one of the things that I've noticed that is often different about me and the people I am close to and my family is that we hear our subconscious. So we know what it's thinking about and how it feels about something while it's happening. And from my understanding, that's not that common, that not everybody can hear their own unconscious and subconscious. And of course, that is actually the current psychological thinking, is that we don't have any control over that, which I wholeheartedly disagree with, because their idea is that anything that's happened to you by the age of 4, it's a done deal, and your personality has been completely formed, and you've been shaped by your experiences, and you may never know what they were, but you are now this, whatever this is. And I have found that, through focused attention and ritual, I have been able to open up those doors again and to reorganize the subconscious of my own mind and my unconscious as well, to make it something that's going to work better for me and give me more conscious control over my destiny and where I go and what I do. So that notion that we pick our family from the other side and decide where we're going to go is sort of a romanticized notion that's actually pretty toxic. It's what we're beginning to call toxic positivity, because if you are responsible for picking your circumstances and picking your parents, then that leads to some bizarre thinking that if you're born into a horrific family like I was, for example, then you wanted that, you asked for it, and on some level you must deserve it because this is your karmic due, which isn't really how it works. This is just us doing it to ourselves and then blaming the victim for the circumstance instead of looking towards society's particular issues around facing their own darkness as a whole and dealing with it, changing how society deals with children who are being abused and so forth. There's still so far for us to come as far as becoming actually awake instead of just like, semi awake here and there. And so when I started to channel and Moida started coming through, people had a lot of questions that they asked her about how it works on the other side. And interesting from her perspective of how things worked, is like there's energetic barriers between different levels on the other side. So we all might get dumped into like a basic lower astral realm or whatever you want to call it, and then from there decide if we're going up, we're going down, coming back, moving sideways, whatever the case may be. And then there are other levels that are separated by vibrational energetic barriers. And Moida explained to someone rather clearly that, she hadn't incarnated in a long time. But when it happened, it's like there's a decision making process where, as a spirit being, you decide that you have learned all you can from physical reality. You're ready to like translate up into a higher realm, higher vibrational realm. And so here is this like barricade of energy, and you start going through it and you pierce through the bottom layer of that and start traveling up. Once you pierce through it and start to travel up, there's no downward motion. Everything has to continue on in that direction. So you're committed When you decide that, you are 100% committed to um, going through that barrier. And Moida explained that as she was going up into that barrier about halfway through, she suddenly realized that she really wasn't all on board with the process. There were still parts of her that weren't ready to leave this plane. Um, and those parts couldn't get through the barrier. They kind of fell back. So it's kind of like if you have, I don't know, a filtration sieve kind of thing, like when you're making noodles and you pour the noodles in and the water goes through the holes, but the noodles don't because they're bigger. It's kind of like that idea that the um, refined stuff can get through, but the big chunks can't. And my oversoul, or whatever you want to call it, was that piece of her that wasn't ready to leave here and sunk back down into the level where reincarnation takes place. And so she felt responsible for me and all of my lives that I'm having because of that. And that's why she came to me when I was a child and has been with me off and on throughout my life, throughout this life. And sort of taking personal responsibility on another level, as it were, for my development. Because if she had been more aware of her own unconscious at that point, she would have stayed longer and worked through whatever was left before she did that. So, like, there can be downward movement to a certain point from those realms, but it's like a much farther reach. And one of the reasons why I could channel her was because of our link, our energetic link. And so it was possible for her to sort of follow that strand of energy down far enough to where she could communicate thoughts, ideas, and feelings to me and then through me to others and sort of raise our general vibration up when she did that, because in order for us to be able to perceive it, our vibrational rate had to be high enough. It's sort of like there's a narrow spot where that kind of back and forth can take place. Um, so interesting anyway, in any event. So the importance of us processing and doing our shadow work is that it's important for us to do that so we have less stuff that may drag us back down. I have decided at this point being incarnated is not a bad thing. It's a good thing to be here, even with all of the stuff that happens and that goes on and everything else. Because if everybody just sort of abandoned the place, there'd be no one who had any information to share with anybody else, and everybody would always be walking in the dark and not knowing where the light switch was, as a metaphor. And certainly that's how Moida viewed it with the work that we did together. When we were doing the sessions and stuff like that, the energetic vibration of everyone in the room would suddenly shift. And she said more than once, this is so that you will know what an altered state of consciousness actually feels like. And it is like very different. Um, very different, to say the least. So I think that I don't think it matters if someone is an agnostic or an atheist or a super religious person when they pass over. I think that this process is the same regardless of our belief systems that we may have, but the specifics of what we see and what we end up doing are going to be different. So, having remembered a whole bunch of different lifetimes, I don't believe in reincarnation. I know that it's real because I've experienced it viscerally. I've remembered things from other times and places. I don't have doubts about the process. I know it happens. The mechanics I might be a little fuzzy on, but and then the wider picture where there is no such thing as time and they're all happening at the same time, which is always a good way to make your brain want to explode thinking about that too much. Um, And when I had my near death experience not that many years ago, sort of that whole notion was affirmed for me because, I saw the two angels that are with me and went to get a closer look at them because, they're shiny and sparkly and pretty. And I'm, a sucker for glitter, I guess. And then through them saw the light, and it was also shiny and sparkly and glittery, and started traveling up it, and then they kept bringing me back. So when they made it clear that if I kept on going, they wouldn't be able to bring me back, I had to make a conscious choice to stay here, which I did, because I didn't want to leave my husband and my children and my friends and everybody, and I knew they'd all be mad at me for going. Not that that part concerned me, but I didn't want to make them sad because that was more of a concern, that they would be very sad if I wasn't here and maybe blame themselves or something. Who knows? We get into some pretty interesting mental gymnastics when uh, we feel grief, which is a hard emotion and a hard feeling both. To figure out how to traverse, I guess is the word I'm looking for, to come out the other side of. So, I'll usually a couple of days before somebody is definitely going to be crossing over, someone that they're comfortable with that has already passed over will appear to them. Whether it's literally them or not, I don't know that that matters, but it seems to be them. Family members, a lost love, that passed away, and so forth. And I've seen this in nursing homes. I worked in a nursing home as a temp in Medford at one point, and I would walk in and I would see spirits hanging out with some of the people who were there, trying to comfort them and, you know, can help their confusion and and whatnot. And I would always know if someone had passed the night before after I left work when I walked in because there was a feeling that just said that that had happened. I don't know how to describe it, but it was just a clarity, a knowingness. So I know that they were there, and I know recently um, I told you all about my uncle who's 3 months was 3 months older than me when my mother was there visiting him before he passed. He saw someone, he didn't say who it was, he just saw someone with recognition and said, "Are you here to take me?" So that seems to be pretty clear. Sometimes who you see is going to depend upon your belief system and your culture. Again, we're creating all of this stuff out of our imagination and our beliefs. So, depending on what your religion is, you're going to see different beings or spirits or helpers or angels or gods or goddesses or, you know, in the bad sense, demons or, torturers or what have you. So that's why it's so important, again, to do the shadow work because part of that work is evaluating your beliefs that you've just absorbed from your environment without any conscious effort or thought on your part. You're born into a family that has a certain set of beliefs. You're born into a country that has a certain set of beliefs, that has a specific type of culture, an attitude towards foreigners or the other side and spirits, whatever it happens to be. We just sort of take all that inside of us without filtering when we're children because we don't know what is true or untrue or good or bad. Everything is equal. And so it just all comes in. And it's only after we gain a certain amount of independent thought, that we can process that information and choose whether we're going to accept it as our reality or whether we're going to replace it with something else. This is, of course, what I did when I decided that Christianity was not a positive influence on my life and my spiritual growth, and found that there were more witches out there than I knew, and that I could actually find people that were like me, and that I wasn't alone. And, it's like, just because one set of beliefs is what I was born with didn't mean other people hadn't believed different things. That was why the fourth grade was such a mind blowing experience for me, because they introduced me to Greek mythology and that. And that was just kind of like a gong going off. I think that's the first true epiphany that I ever had that I can recall, where it was immediately obvious to me that, wait a minute, people used to believe in different gods and goddesses than the one they believe in now. So if they did it in the past, that means they could do it again in the future. I mean, it opened up some pathways in my mind that I didn't know were there. Um, yeah, so it was pretty interesting. And that's the thing about a magical path, is keeping that open mind, realizing you don't know everything is really important, and that belief is not the same as reality, but belief is powerful. And the stronger the belief, the more real it will seem when you leave your body, because that's when things become physical in essence on the other side for you. One of the reasons why I like that movie, What Dreams May Come, because it perfectly um, exemplifies that concept all the way through the whole movie. And if you haven't seen it, I recommend it, but it's not necessary to see it for comprehension. I just thought it was great that someone else knew what I knew and wrote a book about it, and then someone else decided to make a movie and make it into a movie, and it worked. So, knowing that you're going to potentially make decisions without knowing you're making decisions means knowing yourself is even more important than anything else you can do. Knowing who you are, knowing how you feel, defining yourself. Because if you die undefined, then you're like a leaf in a hurricane, and you're going to be tossed around by anything and everything that you've ever encountered, and who knows where you'll end up. Trying to think if there are any other things like that that would be worth sharing or that would come to mind right now. Our existence in the physical realm is narrow. We have narrow field of vision. We see very specific color spectrum, hear very specific sound spectrum. Our senses are not as acute as a lot of other beings, creatures, animals, and whatnot that are out there. And to realize that our understanding of the universe depends upon our experience of it and our willingness to be open to other possibilities. It's like what we see is just a piece of the whole. We don't see the entire picture. So if we were a fish and we were in a pond and a person put their finger in the water and put their hand in the pond, what we would see as a fish would be this weird elliptical shape that suddenly got bigger and bigger and then transformed into something else appearing in our realm. And that's often how encounters with spirit beings go. What we perceive of them is limited by that differences between the vibrational rates where they exist and where we exist, and how they're changing their vibrational rate in order to communicate with us changes something essential about them. So we never actually perceive them 100%. It's always an approximation of what they are, because they can only show us like the finger or the hand in the pond. It's like coming through that energetic barrier. It's an analogy that seems to work, to try and explain how that works. And it's a journey that we end up going on our own with. I mean, no one else can lead us completely through it. As a rescue medium, I can help some spirits get to the right current, I guess, in that stream, and connect them to that right thread that they can follow in order to go where they need to go, where they can hopefully unravel all the stuff that was confusing for them in their life, and then maybe move on to new lessons and something more. But yeah, it's not a simple subject, and it's worth thinking about a lot. I mean, considering the potential consequences of not doing the work when you're here. The thing is that not everyone is ready to do the work, and that's okay too, because if you're not ready to do this kind of work, then that just means that there's other things you're working through to get to the point where you've gotten those kind of barriers out of your way, so they're not in your way, stopping you from doing, having realizations and so forth. And I'm glad that I'm here. I'm glad that I can articulate some of this stuff that's very difficult to articulate. And I know that every word I use is an approximation of an experience or an idea that I've had that doesn't do it justice. There's no way that you can really do it justice. It's not possible. Um, but it's all fascinating and amazing and interesting and wondrous, and in some cases scary for some people. Um, I was kind of glad that I kept trying to cross over that time, because I wasn't in the least bit frightened when that was going on. It was the most natural thing in the world to do, to travel up that energetic river and, rise up through it in order to get to the other side, the tunnel or whatever you want to call it. And I'm glad I had my angels to bring me back and say, hey, are you serious about wanting to go over? Or are you just doing this because it's a lark? And I'm like, oh, I guess I better not do that, because then it'll be harder to communicate with the people I leave behind. But yeah, that's why I focus so much on boundaries and self definition. Seriously, if you don't know who you are, you're going to be in big trouble on the other side when you come face to face with that thing you totally forgot about when you were like 8. And all of a sudden it's like, ah, oh my God, what did I do? Does that mean I should go to hell? Maybe? Um, so you want to be able to make more clear choices and decide for sure what you want to do, instead of just being thrust into the current and finding your way back and then forgetting everything and pop, there you are. I had a memory of just before I was born in this life that came back to me once, which was quite fascinating. I was sleeping when it happened, but it was so clear I knew it wasn't a dream. And I was a ball of light, and there was another ball of light that was sort of floating around me that had a voice, And the other ball of light said, "You will forget everything you know until the time comes for you to remember." And then it was gone, and I was born and had forgotten. I think I've started remembering a lot of different things throughout this life. And, hopefully there's more yet for me to remember. But in the meantime, I do my best. And try to consider the consequences of my actions and what kind of ripples I might be making in the larger pond of reality. Apparently, I'm with the water metaphor. And do my best. But there's no way to know what other people are here to learn, and no way to know what your ripples will do if they encounter someone who isn't ready to receive it. So if you know someone that you think is very, very bright spiritually, and yet very, very dumb in lots of other ways, try to remember that it's not our individual jobs to make everyone else see what we see. It's our individual jobs to clear ourselves out as much as possible so that we can see as much as we can, and other people have to do the same. And if they're hiding from reality, then they're not ready to face it. And all you can do is like be there if they wake up and go, "Wow, what's going on? I had a thing that happened. Can you explain it to me?" Or what have you. Every path we're on is unique, and none of our paths are, you know, our paths cross in these moments when you're listening to my voice and when we share our thoughts and our ideas. But they're only small moments in each of our lives. So remain humble, remain open and accepting of where other people are at. Try to let them learn their own lessons if you can. Help people who ask for it if you can. Sometimes you can't. You can only do what you can. And be kind to yourself and realize that you're a human being and you're going to make a lot of mistakes. And mistakes aren't the end of the world unless you decide to make them that. So, I guess that's about all I can think of on this particular subject right now that seems appropriate. So, I will say goodbye now. This has been Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. Blessed be.